On January 17, 1942, along the Ledo Road sector near Mandalay, Burma, Allied supply convoys recorded a 43% loss rate over 6 weeks. The expectation was simple: maintain formation, deliver supplies, accept attrition as operational cost. The result defied every projection in Allied Southeast Asia command files. A January 22nd after action report from the 7th Motorized Transport Company noted, convoy spacing altered per field decision, losses reduced to 11% over identical route. The shift wasn't ordered from above. It emerged from necessity, from drivers who understood that survival required breaking every rule they'd been taught. The numbers would later rewrite doctrine across 3 theatres. But on that humid morning, with 12 trucks idling near the jungle's edge, Sergeant William, quote, Billy Hawkins, couldn't have known his improvisation would outlive the war. By mid-January 1942, the Burma Road had become the Allies' most vulnerable artery. Japanese forces controlled the coastline. Air superiority belonged to the enemy. Ground supply lines remained the only option for forces defending northern Burma and supporting Chinese nationalist armies. The 7th Motorized Transport Company, stationed outside Rangoon, operated 12 truck convoys on rotating schedules. Each convoy carried approximately 18 tons of ammunition, medical supplies, and rations. The route stretched 240 kilometers through mountainous jungle terrain, exposed to sniper fire, improvised explosives, and coordinated ambushes. Sergeant Billy Hawkins, a 31-year-old transport specialist from Ohio, had driven supply routes since November 1941. His service record noted mechanical aptitude and steady performance under fire. The convoy system followed standard doctrine. Trucks maintained 60-meter intervals, traveled at uniform speed, and adhered to strict formation. Tactical manuals emphasized cohesion. Scattered convoys invited confusion, command breakdown, and abandonment of disabled vehicles. On the morning of January 17th, Hawkins led his convoy north from the Rangoon depot. The air smelled of diesel and rotting vegetation. Humidity hung at 87%. Temperature climbed toward 34 degrees Celsius before noon. Hawkins wiped sweat from his glasses, checked the mirror, and confirmed all 12 trucks were moving. Private Charles Miller, the company's lead mechanic, rode in the passenger seat, reviewing maintenance logs. Miller was 24, from Pennsylvania, quiet and methodical. He'd kept the convoy running through monsoons and mechanical failures that should have stopped them cold. The road narrowed as they climbed into the hills. Trees pressed close, creating a tunnel of green shadow. Visibility dropped to 40 meters. Radio chatter remained minimal. Strict protocols to avoid interception. Hawkins felt the familiar tension building in his shoulders. Every convoy lost trucks. It was statistical certainty. The question was always how many and whether the mission completed. At 09 to 17, approximately 18 kilometers from the depot, rifle fire cracked through the jungle canopy. The third truck in line swerved, tires shrieking against loose gravel. Metal punctured. The truck lurched right, clipped a tree, and rolled onto its side. Hawkins hit the brakes. The convoy accordion stopped behind him. Miller was already on the radio. Third truck down, sniper contact, holding position. Hawkins cursed quietly. Standard procedure dictated securing the disabled vehicle, redistributing cargo, and continuing with reduced capacity. But as soldiers dismounted to assess damage, more shots echoed from the tree line. The enemy had positioned for exactly this scenario. Tight formation made targeting predictable. Recovery made them stationary. Hawkins watched 2 more trucks take fire before the convoy could even begin salvage operations. The convoy sat immobilized for 47 minutes while soldiers worked to extract ammunition crates from the overturned truck. Enemy fire remained sporadic, but effective. By the time they resumed movement, they'd lost 2 vehicles entirely and transferred cargo onto the remaining 10 trucks, overloading axles and suspensions beyond recommended capacity. Miller inspected the damage during the halt. His hands were black with grease, his face grim. "Tires won't hold this weight on mountain roads," he told Hawkins. "We're asking for blowouts every 10 kilometers." Hawkins studied the convoy's new configuration. 10 trucks, now packed tighter than before, moving slower due to increased load. The enemy had learned their patterns. Morning convoys departed at WWII. Routes rarely varied. Spacing remained constant. Speed held steady at 32 kilometers per hour on flat terrain, dropping to 15 on inclines. "They know exactly where to hit us," Hawkins said, more to himself than Miller. The mechanic nodded. "And when? They just wait for the formation to enter kill zones." Hawkins lit a cigarette, watching smoke drift into the canopy. The system was fundamentally broken. Doctrine assumed convoys needed cohesion for command and control, but cohesion made them predictable. Predictability made them dead. A radio message crackled from command. "Status report, 7th transport." Hawkins keyed the mic. 2 trucks lost, cargo redistributed, continuing mission. ETA delayed 90 minutes. "Acknowledged. Maintain formation protocols." Hawkins didn't respond immediately. He looked at Miller. "What if we didn't?" Miller raised an eyebrow. "Didn't what?" "Maintain formation." The mechanic set down his wrench. "Sir, that's doctrine," Hawkins finished. "I know, but doctrine's getting us killed." They resumed movement at 10:04, still following standard procedures, but Hawkins couldn't stop thinking about the gaps, the vulnerabilities encoded into every rule they followed. That night, back at the depot, he reviewed after-action reports from previous convoys. 6 weeks of operations, 43% loss rate. The numbers were unsustainable. At current attrition, the 7th transport would cease functioning within a month. He found Miller in the maintenance bay, working by lamplight on a damaged transmission. "I need to talk through something," Hawkins said. "Something that'll probably get us court-martialed." Miller wiped his hands. "I'm listening." Hawkins spread a map across the workbench. "Every attack happens the same way. They pick a choke point, wait for the convoy to bunch up, and hit the middle trucks. We can't maneuver, can't scatter, can't respond without breaking formation." Miller traced the route with one finger. "Because if we break formation, we lose tactical cohesion. That's the entire point of convoy doctrine." "Except cohesion doesn't matter if everyone's dead," Hawkins countered. "The enemy doesn't care about our organizational integrity. They care about predictable targets." He pulled out a notebook, sketched rough diagrams. "What if we varied spacing, staggered intervals? Some trucks close, some distant. Random patterns the enemy can't anticipate." Miller frowned. "Command would never authorize that." "I'm not asking command," Hawkins said quietly. The mechanic looked at him. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. Next convoy, we test it. Subtle changes first, see if it makes a difference." Miller studied the map. "If it works, we save lives. If it doesn't, we face disciplinary action for violating protocol during combat operations." Hawkins nodded. "That's the calculation." They spent 3 hours working through logistics. Variable spacing required constant communication. Drivers needed to understand the concept without formal briefing. Fuel consumption would increase due to speed variations, but the potential benefit, reduced predictability, could save the convoy. On January 20th, Hawkins briefed his drivers informally. "Listen carefully. We're adjusting spacing based on terrain. I'll call intervals over the radio. stay sharp, stay flexible. If I say tighten up, close gaps. If I say spread, increase distance, no questions asked. The drivers exchanged glances. Corporal James Reed, a Texan with 8 months in country, spoke up. Sarge, that's not standard procedure. I'm aware, Hawkins replied, but standard procedure has us losing 4 trucks per convoy. I'm trying something different. If it fails, blame falls on me. Understood? Slow nods around the circle. These men had watched friends die following doctrine. They were willing to try alternatives. The next morning, January 21st, Hawkins' convoy departed at 08 hours as scheduled, but by kilometre 15 spacing had become irregular. Some trucks maintained 40 metres, others stretched to 120. The formation looked chaotic from above. From the ground it felt uncertain. But when the first shots came, something changed. The ambush occurred at 09:33 along a section of road Allied intelligence had flagged as high risk. Hawkins heard the familiar crack of rifle fire, but this time only 1 truck took damage. The 5th in line, which happened to be travelling through a natural gap in the spacing. All units, maintain speed. Do not stop, Hawkins transmitted. 5, can you continue? Affirmative, minor damage, proceeding. The convoy kept moving. Enemy snipers, positioned to target a predictable formation, found themselves aiming at empty road. The trucks they could see were either too far ahead or hadn't yet entered the kill zone. By the time they adjusted, the convoy had passed. Miller checked his watch. 38 seconds of contact. Previous ambushes averaged 3 to 4 minutes. Hawkins felt something shift in his understanding. They couldn't track us. Their timing was off. Because we weren't where they expected, Miller said. The convoy completed its run with 0 losses. Hawkins filed a standard after-action report, noting, light contact, no casualties, mission successful. He didn't mention the spacing variation, not yet. One test proved nothing. On January 22nd, they tried again. This time, Hawkins added speed variations. Trucks alternated between slow climbs and faster straightaways, creating unpredictable arrival times at known ambush points. Radio discipline remained tight, but drivers began to understand the pattern. Chaos was the strategy. The second convoy encountered 2 ambush attempts. Both failed to inflict significant damage. The enemy's pre-positioned forces couldn't adapt quickly enough to the irregular spacing and timing. Hawkins' trucks moved like a loosely connected organism, rather than a rigid formation. That evening, Miller reviewed the results. 2 convoys, 0 losses. Previous 6 weeks averaged 5.2 trucks lost per 12-truck convoy. Hawkins knew they'd stumbled onto something significant, but proving it required more data. And explaining it to command required political courage he wasn't sure he possessed. Captain Robert Foster, the company commander, summoned Hawkins on January 23rd. Foster was a West Point graduate, 42 years old. Career military. He believed in doctrine. Your last 2 convoys show unusual after-action patterns, Foster said, reviewing reports. No losses, minimal contact, faster completion times. Explain. Hawkins chose his words carefully. We adjusted spacing based on terrain, sir. Maintained flexibility to respond to threats. Foster looked up. You altered formation protocols? Within operational parameters, sir. Results speak for themselves. Foster set down the report. Sergeant, I appreciate initiative, but convoy doctrine exists for tested reasons. Formations prevent vehicles from being isolated and destroyed individually. With respect, sir, our losses suggest formations make us collectively vulnerable to coordinated ambushes. The captain leaned back. You're proposing we abandon proven tactical principles based on 2 successful runs? I'm proposing we test an alternative approach that's demonstrably reducing casualties. Foster was silent for a long moment. Continue your methods for 1 week. Document everything. If loss rates remain low, I'll forward your findings to division. If they spike, we revert to standard doctrine. Clear? Yes, sir. Over the next 7 days, Hawkins refined the technique. He briefed drivers more thoroughly, explaining the theory. Unpredictability creates targeting problems for static ambushes. Variable spacing forces the enemy to commit resources without guaranteed targets. Speed variations prevent timing-based attacks. Corporal Reed became an advocate. It's like we're not even a convoy anymore, he told other drivers. We're individual trucks that happen to be going the same direction. By January 29th, the 7th Transport Company had completed 6 convoys using variable spacing and timing. Total losses: 1 truck to mechanical failure, 0 to enemy action. The 43% loss rate had dropped to effectively 0 over that week. Captain Foster compiled data and forwarded it to Divisional Logistics with a cautious endorsement. Unorthodox tactical modification shows promising preliminary results. Recommend controlled expansion of trial. Division's response came February 3. Method approved for continued testing. Maintain detailed records. Provide bi-weekly updates. Word spread through other transport companies. Drivers heard about the 7th's survival rate and wanted to understand how. Hawkins found himself explaining the concept repeatedly. Stop being predictable. The enemy plans for convoys that follow patterns. Break the patterns. Not everyone embraced it. Lieutenant Charles Morrison, commanding the 9th Transport Company, argued the method invited disaster. Spacing is safety, he insisted during a February logistics meeting. Individual trucks are vulnerable. We maintain cohesion for mutual support. Cohesion makes us a collective target, Hawkins replied. Individual trucks moving unpredictably are harder to mass target than a grouped formation. Morrison wasn't convinced. His company continued standard protocols. By mid-February, the contrast was stark. The 7th Transport maintained near 0 loss rates, while the 9th recorded 38% losses over 3 weeks. The numbers forced command to pay attention. On February 18th, Allied Southeast Asia Command issued Tactical Bulletin 47B, Transport Convoy Modifications, Variable Spacing Protocols. The bulletin didn't mandate changes but authorized company commanders to implement staggered formations at their discretion. Hawkins' method had achieved semi-official recognition, but recognition brought new pressures. Division assigned observers to his convoys, documenting procedures and interviewing drivers. Major Harold Stevens, a logistics specialist from command staff, rode with Hawkins on February 23rd. Stevens was analytical, constantly taking notes. "Walk me through your decision-making process," he said as the convoy prepared to depart. Hawkins explained, "First truck sets base pace. I monitor terrain and call spacing adjustments over radio. Drivers respond based on immediate conditions. The goal is preventing the enemy from predicting our exact position at any given moment. And if a truck breaks down, nearest vehicle provides support, but the convoy doesn't stop. We've lost the assumption that everyone waits for everyone else." Stevens frowned. "That contradicts mutual support principles." "It does," Hawkins admitted. "But waiting for disabled vehicles creates stationary targets. We've found it's better to keep moving, provide recovery after the convoy completes its run." The February 21st convoy encountered heavy contact near a village called Kyoksei. Enemy forces had positioned machine gun nests on both sides of the road, anticipating a standard formation. When Hawkins' trucks arrived in scattered intervals, the crossfire couldn't achieve its intended effect. guns positioned to catch trucks in synchronized fire found their firing solutions invalid by the time they could engage. One truck took damage, the 8th vehicle which had closed spacing to assist a struggling 7th truck. Even then, both vehicles maintained movement and exited the kill zone before enemy forces could concentrate fire. Stevens witnessed the entire engagement. His report to division was unequivocal. Variable spacing methodology demonstrates clear tactical advantage against prepared ambush positions. Recommend immediate expansion to all Burma Road transport operations. By March 1942, 12 transport companies had adopted variations of Hawkins' technique. Loss rates across the Burma Road corridor dropped from 41% to 14%. The change saved approximately 220 trucks and their crews over 6 weeks. But the enemy was adapting. Japanese forces began deploying mobile ambush teams rather than static positions. These units tracked convoys, identified patterns in the variable spacing, and attempted to exploit transition moments when trucks adjusted intervals. On March 8th, a convoy from the 11th Transport Company encountered a mobile ambush team that had studied the new tactics. The enemy waited until trucks began spreading their spacing, then attacked during the vulnerable adjustment period. 3 trucks were destroyed before the convoy could respond. Hawkins reviewed the after-action report. The enemy had learned to target transitions, the moments when drivers executed spacing changes. It was a predictable element within the unpredictable system. Miller suggested a counter-adaptation. We vary how we vary. Sometimes widen spacing gradually, sometimes all at once. Change the rhythm of changes. Meta-randomization, Hawkins said. Randomize the randomization. They tested it March 10th. Hawkins called spacing adjustments using different patterns, sometimes smooth transitions, sometimes abrupt. Drivers learned to respond instantly without questioning the logic. The convoy became genuinely unpredictable, even to itself. Japanese intelligence reports from March 1942, captured after the war, noted Allied transport columns exhibit irregular behavior inconsistent with documented doctrine. Ambush planning increasingly ineffective. Recommend shift to mine-based interdiction. The enemy's adaptation proved the tactic's effectiveness. When conventional ambushes failed, they resorted to random mining, a less efficient but necessary alternative. By late March, variable spacing had become standard across Allied transport operations in Burma. Training materials incorporated the technique. New drivers learned irregular spacing before they learned formation discipline, but success created its own problems. Some drivers interpreted variable spacing as license for reckless independence. Convoys fragmented beyond recovery. Communication discipline collapsed. On March 23rd, the 14th Transport Company lost 5 trucks when drivers scattered so widely they couldn't coordinate response to a coordinated enemy attack. Captain Foster called a company meeting. The method works because we maintain disciplined flexibility. It's not chaos, it's controlled unpredictability. Drivers who think they can freelance endanger everyone. Hawkins added, variable spacing requires more communication, not less. More awareness, not less. We're not abandoning doctrine. We're evolving it based on battlefield reality. The balance between structure and flexibility remained delicate, but the numbers continued favoring the new approach. On April 2nd, 1942, Hawkins' convoy encountered what after-action reports later termed coordinated adaptive interdiction. Japanese forces had deployed observation posts to track convoy movements in real time, relaying position data to multiple ambush teams positioned along probable routes. The attack began at 10:17, approximately 40 kilometers north of Mandalay. Initial fire came from the east, targeting the lead truck. Hawkins swerved, Maintain speed. But as the convoy adjusted spacing to evade the attack, a second team opened fire from the west, targeting gaps in the formation. They're reading our adjustments, Miller said, monitoring radio traffic. Hawkins recognized the trap. The enemy had learned to use the variable spacing against them by creating multiple threat vectors that made any spacing adjustment vulnerable to at least one firing position. All trucks maintain current spacing, do not adjust, Hawkins transmitted. We're pushing through. It was a gamble. Maintaining spacing meant accepting hits from positions already zeroed in, but adjusting spacing would trigger secondary ambushes positioned specifically to exploit those adjustments. The convoy took fire for approximately 90 seconds. 2 trucks sustained damage but remained mobile. By refusing to adapt, Hawkins had denied the enemy their adaptation to his adaptation. After the convoy cleared the attack zone, Miller asked, "How did you know to hold spacing?" "I didn't," Hawkins admitted, "but they expected us to change, so we didn't." The engagement revealed a new dynamic. Tactical evolution had become a game of anticipating anticipation. The enemy adapted to Hawkins' tactics, Hawkins had to adapt to their adaptation, and so on, in accelerating cycles. Our April 7th intelligence briefing at divisional headquarters addressed the escalation. Enemy forces demonstrate sophisticated understanding of Allied variable spacing methodology. Transport companies must continuously evolve implementation to prevent enemy counter-adaptation. Hawkins realized the technique's long-term viability depended on continuous innovation. Static application of variable spacing would eventually become predictable. The method itself had to remain dynamic. He began training drivers in multiple spacing patterns: tight-loose alternation, gradual expansion, sudden compression, asymmetric distributions. Each convoy used different combinations. The goal was preventing the enemy from developing reliable counter-tactics. By mid-April, loss rates had stabilized at 12%, still significantly better than the original 43%, but higher than the initial near-zero rates achieved in January and February. The technique worked, but it required constant refinement. On April 24, 1942, Allied Southeast Asia Command convened a logistics review in Calcutta. Hawkins was ordered to attend and present findings on variable spacing methodology. He'd never addressed a room of senior officers before. Major General Louis Brereton, commanding Allied air forces in the theatre, chaired the session. 23 officers from various logistics, intelligence, and tactical planning sections attended. Hawkins felt acutely aware of his sergeant's stripes in a room full of stars and eagles. "Sergeant Hawkins," General Brereton began, "your field modifications have generated considerable data. Walk us through the underlying principle." Hawkins stood, referred to prepared notes. "Sir, the core principle is tactical unpredictability. Traditional convoy doctrine assumes formation integrity provides mutual protection. Our experience suggests formation integrity makes convoys collectively vulnerable to coordinated ambush. By varying spacing, timing, and speed, we create targeting problems for static and semi-mobile enemy positions." A colonel from logistics interrupted, "But you're sacrificing command coherence. How do you maintain operational control over a scattered convoy?" "Radio communication and driver initiative, sir. Convoy leaders provide guidance, but individual drivers make immediate tactical decisions based on local conditions." Another officer, "That's a significant departure from hierarchical command structure." "Yes, sir, but the battlefield doesn't wait for centralized decision-making. Drivers under fire need authority to maneuver immediately." General Brereton leaned forward. "What are current loss rates using your method across all Burma Road transport operations?" Hawkins provided data. 12% average since March 1st, sir, down from 41% in January. The room quieted. Numbers carried authority that theory couldn't match. That's approximately 180 trucks and 540 personnel saved over 3 months, Brereton calculated aloud. Significant operational impact. The meeting continued for 2 hours, examining logistics, training requirements, and scalability. By the end, Command issued Directive 93B. Variable Spacing Doctrine. Standard operating procedure for theatre transport operations. Hawkins' field improvisation had become official policy, but he felt uneasy. "Sir," he addressed General Brereton after the meeting, "once this becomes standard, the enemy will develop comprehensive counters." Brereton nodded. "Then we'll adapt again, Sergeant. War is continuous evolution. Your contribution isn't a permanent solution, it's a temporary advantage. We exploit that advantage while it lasts." By May 1942, variable spacing had spread beyond Burma. Transport operations in North Africa, Mediterranean supply routes, and European theatre rear areas began experimenting with irregular convoy formations. The technique's success in Burma provided proof of concept for broader application. In North Africa, British 8th Army convoys adapted the methodology to desert conditions, where visibility ranges and terrain created different tactical constraints. American forces preparing for European operations incorporated variable spacing into training protocols. Hawkins remained in Burma, running convoys and refining techniques. On May 19th, his convoy encountered what after-action reports described as the most sophisticated enemy interdiction attempt to date. Japanese forces had established a multi-layered ambush system, observation posts, tracked convoy approach, relay stations coordinated multiple ambush teams, and blocking forces positioned to prevent retreat. The system anticipated variable spacing and prepared responses for various formations. The attack began at 11:04, 32 kilometers from the Chinese border. Initial fire came from elevated positions, targeting the convoy with mortars rather than direct fire. The bombardment was designed to force spacing adjustments, which would trigger secondary ambushes. Hawkins recognized the strategy immediately. All units do not adjust spacing, maintain speed, accept proximity to mortar impacts. It was counterintuitive. Doctrine said disperse when under artillery fire, but dispersing would activate the trap. Miller, riding beside him, gripped the dashboard as a mortar round impacted 12 meters to their right. "This is insane." "It's the only option that doesn't get us killed," Hawkins replied. The convoy maintained formation through approximately 90 seconds of mortar fire. 3 rounds landed close enough to damage trucks, but none scored direct hits. The secondary ambush teams, positioned to engage dispersing vehicles, found their targets maintaining unexpected cohesion. By refusing to adapt as expected, Hawkins had once again neutralized an enemy counter-adaptation. The convoy completed its mission with minor damage to 2 trucks and no casualties, but Hawkins knew they'd barely survived. The enemy's sophistication was increasing. Eventually they'd develop a tactic that variable spacing couldn't defeat. That night he wrote in his personal log, "The method buys time, not victory. Every adaptation creates space for one more convoy, one more delivery. That's all we can ask." On June 7, 1942, Japanese forces launched a major offensive across northern Burma. Allied defensive positions required massive supply surges to maintain resistance. Transport operations intensified dramatically. Between June 7th and June 14th, the 7th Transport Company ran 19 convoys, more than double normal tempo. Hawkins and his drivers operated on minimal sleep. Trucks received abbreviated maintenance. The variable spacing technique, which required constant attention and communication, became harder to execute under fatigue. On June 11th, Hawkins' convoy departed at 0430, attempting to deliver ammunition to forward positions under heavy pressure. Visibility was limited. Morning fog reduced sight lines to 30 meters. Radio communication grew unreliable due to atmospheric conditions and equipment wear. At 06 and 17, enemy forces attacked using a new tactic: sound-based targeting. Unable to see the scattered convoy, Japanese ambush teams listened for engine noise and fired at acoustic signatures. The technique was imprecise but effective against invisible targets. Hawkins heard the characteristic crack thump of incoming fire. "Cut engines," he transmitted. "Now." 12 trucks went silent simultaneously. The sudden absence of engine noise confused enemy targeting, but stopping engines on a mountain road meant losing momentum on grades and risking restart failures with worn-out starters. They sat in fog-shrouded silence for approximately 4 minutes. Hawkins could hear enemy troops moving through the jungle, searching for the convoy they'd lost. Finally, he transmitted, "Restart on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." 11 engines turned over. 1 failed. Hawkins cursed silently. "Truck 7, status?" "Dead starter, Sarge. Need a tow." There was no time. "Abandon cargo to nearest trucks. Driver comes with us. Move in 60 seconds. They redistributed Truck 7's ammunition in under a minute, with enemy forces probing closer. The convoy restarted movement with 1 less truck, but 0 casualties. The June 11th run exemplified the technique's maturity. Drivers had internalized principles so deeply they could improvise variations, like simultaneous engine cuts, without explicit instruction. Variable spacing had evolved from a tactical modification to an operational philosophy. Adaptability itself was the tactic. By June 15th, Allied forces had withdrawn from several northern positions. The supply surge had bought time but couldn't prevent strategic retreat. Still, transport operations continued with remarkable efficiency. The Burma campaign's Allied retreat concluded in mid-May 1942, though scattered transport operations continued through June. The 7th Transport Company relocated to India in late June, redesignated for Chinese-Burma-India theatre operations. Hawkins received promotion to First Sergeant on July 3rd. Captain Foster, in his efficiency report, wrote, "Sergeant Hawkins demonstrated exceptional tactical innovation under combat conditions. His field modifications to convoy operations saved an estimated 200-plus vehicles and 600-plus personnel. Recommend commendation and retention in logistics planning role." Hawkins never received a medal. His innovation didn't fit traditional valor narratives, but his technique survived him. In August 1942, the U.S. Army published Field Manual 25-10 Supplement, Motor Transport Operations, Variable Formation Protocols. The manual codified variable spacing as standard doctrine, with detailed implementation guidelines based on data from Burma operations. By late 1943, Allied transport operations across all theatres had adopted some form of irregular convoy spacing. Loss rates in high-threat environments averaged 8 to 12%, compared to pre-1942 rates of 35–45% in similar conditions. German intelligence reports from 1943, captured post-war, noted, "Allied transport columns demonstrate adaptive formation discipline preventing effective interdiction, recommend increased reliance on armor and air interdiction versus ambush tactics." The technique's success forced enemy forces to invest in more resource-intensive countermeasures, shifting strategic calculus across multiple theatres. Hawkins spent 1943-1945 training transport companies in variable spacing methodology. He never returned to Burma. In December 1945, he mustered out with the rank of Master Sergeant and returned to Ohio, where he worked as a truck fleet manager until retirement in 1971. Private Charles Miller remained in the Army, eventually retiring as a colonel in 1968. In a 1965 interview, he reflected, "The Burma convoys taught me that doctrine serves the mission, not vice versa. When reality contradicts theory, adjust theory." Billy Hawkins understood that instinctively. Corporal James Reed was killed in action in the Philippines, February 1945. Of the original 12 drivers in Hawkins' January 1942 convoy, 7 survived the war. Their collective service logged approximately 140,000 kilometers under combat conditions, with lifetime loss rate of 9%, less than 1/4 the theater average. In 1987, the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College published a case study, Tactical Innovation Under Duress, the Burma Road Variable Spacing Doctrine, 1942-1945. The study analyzed how field-level modifications become institutional doctrine when they solve real problems with measurable results. The authors concluded, Hawkins' innovation succeeded because it addressed a specific vulnerability, convoy predictability, with a simple principle, continuous variation. The method's elegance lay in its scalability. Individual drivers could execute variable spacing with minimal training, yet the collective effect transformed operational survivability. The study noted a broader lesson. Effective military innovation often emerges from tactical-level personnel confronting immediate problems. Command structures that recognize and institutionalize field innovations gain significant advantages over rigid hierarchies that suppress deviation from doctrine. Hawkins died in 1989, age 78. His obituary in the Cleveland Plain Dealer mentioned his WWII service, but not his tactical innovations. Most people who knew him had no idea his improvisation had influenced convoy operations for decades. But in logistics circles, his legacy endured. The principle of tactical unpredictability, varying what can be varied to prevent enemy pattern recognition, became foundational to transport operations, extending eventually to flight paths, ship routing, and communication protocols. A 2003 study by the RAND Corporation analyzed convoy operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, noting, contemporary irregular spacing techniques trace direct lineage to WWII Burma Road modifications. Core principle remains unchanged. Deny adversaries predictable targeting opportunities. The 7th Motorized Transport Company's records, preserved at the National Archives, contain Hawkins' handwritten convoy logs from January-June 1942. The logs show spacing calculations, timing variations, and brief observational notes. One entry from March 15, 1942 reads, tightened intervals through pass, spread on straight away, enemy missed window, 3 seconds timing difference saved truck 4. 3 seconds, the margin between survival and death, encoded in a logbook entry that redefined doctrine. In the end, Hawkins' contribution wasn't dramatic. It was practical, measurable, and replicable. It saved lives by solving a specific problem with available resources. War rewarded such innovations more than it rewarded heroism. The file closed without comment. The numbers had already rewritten the war.